Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Labour are ramping up the pressure on the Tories over the looming mortgage crisis, stoked further with the news today that rates are rising by another 0.5%, just as they have with the energy crisis last year. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, for a party presenting itself as a government in waiting, it's not enough, of course, to point out the sorry state of things and then link it with the government. They also have to show that the government have options, because the British public are a little bit too forgiving. We're sort of like the anti-France. We are far too forgiving of incompetence in government, really. Even if they are satisfied that something is the government's fault, people tend to have the attitude of, well, it's done now, let's just help get through it all. So the opposition have to be able to show that the public that there is a way of making things better. It isn't just that the damage has been done. There is a way to make it better. Ideally with solutions that the government are not prepared to go ahead with. We saw it with the energy crisis last year. The Tories tried to paint it as external effects, even though they simultaneously tried to claim that we were in pretty good shape because we bought hardly any gas from Russia. Look at those idiots in Europe barrel that Russian gas. Yeah, we're fine. Okay, so why have our energy bills doubled then? Global factors. What global factors? Russia. I thought you said you wouldn't buy much from them. I thought you were poking fun at Europe for buying loads. Yeah. Their bills haven't doubled, have they? No. But the public weren't about to blame the Tories for Russia invading Ukraine. So Labour pointed out that if the government applied windfall taxes to the unearned profits of oil and gas companies, they could use the money to keep energy prices down. They could maintain roughly the same energy price cap and use the windfall taxes to compensate energy companies for the extra cost of gas. Obviously, there was no way the Tories would apply windfall taxes to oil companies, and they would not achieve the same maintained energy prices any other way. So the Tories took a hit in the polls. Eventually, Rishi Sunak, who was the Chancellor at the time, was forced to agree to windfall taxes, although he didn't apply them, not to oil companies anyway. Over the summer, when there was effectively no government, Labour again gained in the polls by demanding action to calm the public's nerves about looming energy price increases when the Tories were coming up with excuses to do nothing at all. Turns out doing nothing at all isn't what the public expect of their government in a crisis. Well, now there's another situation, a growing mortgage crisis this time. The Tories are busily trying to blame the Governor of the Bank of England, even though he was their pick. The reason they picked him is because he was basically the closest thing to a Brexiteer they could find to do the job. But it is an attempt to pretend that government policy can't impact the crisis that is unfolding. So what Labour need to do is propose policies which will help, which the current Tory government could easily implement, but won't. Unlike with the energy crisis, however, there are no straightforward solutions here. Cannot emphasise enough just how ridiculous suggestions of a mortgage support package would be. The Lib Dems are calling for a £3 billion mortgage protection fund. I get the general idea. You're going to target it at just those mortgage holders who simply cannot cope. But it's still proposing that we levy taxes in order to pay banks higher profits. It's no different to the way the Tories increased our taxes and borrowing in order to give oil and energy companies money for higher profits last year. We're not really in a position to increase taxes or borrowing to the level required to do this. Plus, it would work against the bank's specific aim of squeezing spending power. It would basically mean raising mortgage rates without even reducing inflation to any appreciable degree. The main concern for voters affected is, how do I afford the hundreds of pounds a month extra? Will they be able to manage at all, even by cutting back? Starmer mentioned someone having to downsize yesterday, but what about people who, say, only took out their mortgage a few years ago? They got pretty much the cheapest property they could. They just got what they could. Well, they can't downsize. So Labour are proposing rules which would force banks to allow mortgage holders to reduce outgoings with either interest-only payments for now or extending the terms of the mortgage. No hit to credit rating. Now these options, of course, still result in people paying more for their mortgage overall as a result of Tory economic vandalism. But from the point of view as those affected, any port in a storm, does it keep me living in my house? Yes. Okay. But the government are very unlikely to do this. So think about it from their point of view. They think they need to increase interest rates in order to stop mortgage holders having money to buy other things. They think taking their disposable income off them will drop the price of goods and services that they were otherwise buying. And of course it will do to an extent. But it will also cause businesses to collapse, raising unemployment and people seeing their homes repossessed. And these consequences feed each other. The more businesses go under or even scale back, the more people lose their jobs. Well, there might be lots of vacancies about nationally, but not necessarily in the right places or for the right money. So if people lose their jobs and they cannot quickly get an income that is on par or better with what they had, well, they could face repossession because they can now no longer afford their mortgage. But the Tories clearly do not care about that. We saw that from Sunak's response in PMQs yesterday. They insist they need to take as much disposable income from people as they can in order to calm inflation down. Those losing their jobs or their homes are necessary collateral damage for them. So allowing more flexible payment arrangements, what would that do? That would actually effectively lower their payments in the here and now. So that would work counter to what they're intending to do by raising interest rates. So very unlikely the Tories would do it unless the public backlash was huge, which is win-win for Labour. If they don't do it, the Tories continue to lose votes from people left basically jobless or destitute by Richie Rish. If the government do adopt measures to at least reduce the chance of repossession, well, what are they doing? They're just doing what Labour said to do, which makes Labour look like the party you want in government because they're the ones who early on say what we should do. Why wait? Why have a Conservative government just to wait for them to play catch up to Labour's ideas? Red Wall Tory MPs are urging Sunak to bring in tax relief on mortgage interest payments. But, as a form of mortgage relief, this would again have the effect of getting the government to increase taxes elsewhere. If you bring in a tax break, then your tax revenues go down. So you either have to accept those lower tax revenues, which means less spending on public services, or you raise other taxes to compensate. Well, the government can't spend less on public services. Also, for Red Wall Tories to suggest this is absolutely maddening because they know that what's going to hurt them is the lack of investment in public services. But the government can't anyway spend less on public services because they're already held together with duct tape. And if the Tories raise taxes again, could you imagine the reaction? Because that's what these Tories don't get. They think, just give mortgage holders a tax break. That'll sort it out, won't it? They don't think about, so what happens to the budget then? What happens to your tax and spend plans? Where are you going to increase the taxes to balance it out? You can't load up more on the poorer workers because they're already under the cosh. And also you're giving with one hand and taking with another. They won't load it up on richer people or corporations because Tory's gone a Tory. Sunak keeps insisting the best way to help mortgage holders is to reduce inflation. But that is grade A bollocks. People's mortgages are going up by more than the cost of living. If inflation is increasing your expenditure by, say, £100 a month, say, how is it helping that person to raise it by £300 a month instead? It's a sleight of hand because mortgage and rent payments aren't included in inflation figures. They should be. They should have an inflation measure, shouldn't they, that actually includes everything that people will reasonably pay out. They won't be able to play this stupid game then because actually they'd be raising inflation, wouldn't they? Lowering CPI inflation doesn't help if people's actual inflation, which does include their rent or mortgage payments, is made to go higher. What an absolutely ridiculous notion. And also, what would happen if it works, right? What happens if it works? Inflation comes down. What then? What happens then? Are the government saying interest rates would then come back down? Well, what then? According to their economic ideas, people would then just go out spending again and drive inflation back up. I mean, maybe they're just hoping that after this shock, people will be a bit more wary and just naturally won't go out spending. I'm not sure that's a robust plan. And apart from anything else, if that is what happens, then that means no economic growth because they're not going out spending on businesses. I've said it before, I used to play a computer game when I was very young, pre-teen. In the 80s, it was called UKPM. You got to run the government. I was very young. I had no idea about economics. I would think I was being a good Prime Minister. I was being really nice. I was doing this. Oh, this would be brilliant, blinding. And it always ended up stoking inflation every time. And I found myself out on my arse after a year. But I was a child and that was a game. Nobody got hurt. Rishi Sunak is that 8-year-old me, for real. Absolute muppet and playing with real people's lives. So in terms of the politics, this is how it's going down. With each passing month, more mortgage holders will get lumbered with way higher payment plan, especially now it's gone up half a percent today. Now, some can't afford it, and they will face either a self-imposed drastic reduction in living standards to cope, or an involuntary one as they are repossessed. Labour's response will be, you could do these things to help those people keep a roof over their heads. The government response will be, no, nothing we can do, pack your bags and go and live in your car. I'm not convinced this is going to improve the Tories' poll ratings, are you? Oh, and fun fact, according to a journalist, a memo has been going around government departments today asking for ideas on fixing inflation. Now, if true, there's no reason to suppose it's not true, then that would mean Sunak doesn't already have a plan of his own. But in January, he said he had a plan to halve inflation. Or maybe, just maybe, he thought inflation would fall all by itself and he could ride the coattails of fortune. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.